Gaza ghetto uprising. 2004, I'm talking about. And there was indeed the Gaza ghetto uprising in 2008, 2012, 2014, 2020, 21, 2024. And I said they will keep getting worse and worse. And that I counted actually Palestinian uprisings in my other book called Popular Resistance in Palestine, A History of Hope and Empowerment, where I talk mostly about the non-armed resistance, which we call in Arabic Muqawama Sha'biyya, or popular resistance. I counted by the time I published that book, that second book called Popular Resistance, was 2012. I counted that we had like 14 uprisings. So this is actually, if you want to count it as an intifada or uprising, it is number 15. And number 15 is interesting number, by the way, because South Africa had 15 uprisings before apartheid ended in South Africa. They come in waves, waves of uprisings. And so maybe we're on the lucky number 15. So maybe this is the last one and we will have peace after it. But anyway, I go back to the issue of colonization. In these books and these articles also, I said, before you offer therapy, you have to understand what's the diagnosis. That's what we call, my background is medical genetics also, what we call in the medical field, etiology. What's the etiology? The etiology is colonization, plain vanilla colonization. It's not, every colonization has unique features. Every colonization has unique aspects. There's also various forms of colonization. So I don't want to make it like this doesn't have unique peculiarities to it, like Jewish history here, for example, of a religious history and other history. But, it's still colonization, every colonization has unique features. For example, the Algerian colonization was settler colonization, but was not displacement settler colonization. Same with South African colonization. Whereas colonization in Australia was displacement settler colonization, where the Europeans wanted the natives out. They killed them, they destroyed them, they had genocide of the Aborigines. We have displacement, but not displacement by genocide. Although now, in retrospect, I would write it differently, and I would say there was incremental genocide beginning in 1948, which now accelerated beginning in October 7, 2023, accelerated extermination campaign. But that's in retrospect. When it doesn't matter, I won't quibble with the issue before October. But now after October, I think the overwhelming evidence is that the so-called final solution is on the table, which is extermination of the local people. That remain, of course. They cannot exterminate the refugees in maybe Lebanon, they can bomb refugee camps. But in other countries, there's 300,000 Palestinians in the US alone. What are you going to do with those, They're not going to forget their homeland, and they're not going to give up. Anyways, the right wing in Israel thinks they can somehow, make the Palestinians give up. As the first email I got on the morning of October 7, 2023, was from a Zionist reader of mine. I have a lot of people on my email list, and he happens to be on my email list. And his email was, pack your bags and go to Jordan. pack your bags and go to Jordan, because after we finish Gaza, we're coming for you in the West Bank, in Bethlehem and all of these areas. So you're not going to remain there. So if you want to save yourself, pack your bags and go to Jordan, go to Amman. The next day, the same person sent me a message, says, on second thoughts, don't go to Jordan because we're going to get Jordan too. So, so I recommend that you go back to the United States, because I know you lived in the US for many years, so you should go back to the US. Where you can have a home, because we are going to take over much larger territory than what we have. I tell you this because it shows you the mentality of a group of people that actually now constitute the majority of the electoral public in Israel. I hate to say this, but it's true. It's a majority of the Israeli public. The poll that showed, for example, when they asked him, is the Israeli military using enough force, not too much force in Gaza, I'm talking about, or too little force, too much force, whatever, or just about the right amount of destruction or force. 94% of the Israeli public voted in this poll. The 2,500 people they polled, representative sample, Jewish Israelis, I'm talking about, of course. 94% were either about the right amount of force, that's about 50%, or 44% not enough force, not enough, meaning they wanted much more damage in Gaza. This is reality. We have to accept that this is the reality that we face. But again, I don't want you to think that this is hopeless in any way, shape, or form. Okay? I think that 6% of Israeli public said no, this is too much force. And even though this was done like 3 months or 2 months after the events of October 7, and Israeli public was obviously traumatized. They've never had such an incident where they lost 1,200 people in one day, never in the history of Israel since 1948. Okay, so, and by the way, it turned out that of the 1,200 people, the civilians who were killed, many of them were killed by and even the military, were killed by the Israeli military bombing their own civilians because of the Hannibal doctrine. We don't know how many, because we need independent investigations, but there's now plenty of evidence that this happened, including the use of bombing of the cars that people were trying to run out of. And the Israeli military said, we didn't know who was who, so we shot at everybody. So anyways, but it's still very traumatic, obviously. And I have even an Israeli woman who is a member of the peace movement, who was also kidnapped and was eventually released. They had interviews with her. You probably saw her interviews, and she said they treated us well and things like that, and everybody was very upset about her, an elderly lady. Anyways, the situation that transpired is really not unique and is not something that we should make it like everything started October 7, And I think you all know this. You all know that October 7 was one day in which Israelis felt like we Palestinians feel every single day since 1948. That's 76 years times 365 days a year, That's 27,725 days in which we experience this daily, okay, daily. And I'm not exaggerating, okay? You know, some days are better than other days. Some days, 500 people are killed, like happened with the bombing of the hospital in the beginning of, I think it was October 13, where nearly 500 people were killed in one day, all of them civilians. And Israel tried to say at that time, because they wanted to check if it's okay to bomb hospitals, they tried to say it was an errant missile from Islamic Jihad or something like that. And then independent investigation showed there was an Israeli missile. And so then they said, hell with it, we can get away with it. So they started bombing hospitals and universities and water sewage treatment facilities, all of these things, infrastructure, schools, etc. So anyways, but all of this violence and counter-violence, if you want, and all of this, whichever you consider reacting to who, you can also call it a cycle of violence. I don't care. But all of this is symptoms of a problem. What's the problem? What's the etiology? Again, you have colonization. Okay. Now, some of you may disagree, and I'm happy to discuss in more detail. And you can also read my book, Sharing the Land of Canaan, which speaks about the solution. But anyways, in looking at it as colonization, there's only one of three possible scenarios going forward to arrive at stabilization. That's because there's every country on earth that had colonization, and every country had it. By the way, I cannot think of a country that escaped this. Even neutral Switzerland, by the way. Why do they speak Italian in the south of Switzerland? Because they were colonized by the Romans. So if we accept that every country had a problem called colonization, we have to look at outcomes. Outcomes are one of three possible scenarios. Three scenarios. First scenario is Algeria model, where 1 million French settlers, colonizers, whatever you want to call them, immigrants, packed their bags and left. Traumatic for them, by the way. Some of them have never seen France in their lives. 6, 7, 8 generations in Algeria, 132 years in Algeria. That's a rare, very, very rare scenario. And very bloody, by the way. Cost something like 2 million Algerian lives. And it's not going to happen here, I assure you. We can talk about that if you want. Second scenario is genocide of the indigenous people. That happened in the United States. It happened in Australia, for example, what became known as United States and Australia, with the Aboriginal people in Australia. There's so few of them, they're manageable in reservations, or a tiny percentage of the population Aborigine in Australia. And I just came back from a trip to Australia, about 2% of the population. That's a second scenario. Also rare, by the way. You could count on one or two hands at best the number of countries that had that outcome. All the other countries, by my count, over 170 countries and territories, had the third outcome, which is that the descendants of the colonizers and the descendants of the colonized live in one country and share. After they end the decolonization phase, after they end the colonization phase, which is the expansive phase, the continuing confiscation of land, etc. This happened in all the countries on earth, all of Europe, all of Latin America, Central America, South America, Caribbean islands, North America, Mexico and Canada, South Africa, Rhodesia, that became called Zimbabwe later, all of Asia, essentially, from Philippines, Malaysia, Taiwan, where my wife is from, By the way, my wife is Chinese, from the group that came to Taiwan. There's indigenous people of Taiwan, and Taiwan has both families of my wife who are not indigenous and families of the indigenous people of Taiwan. Anyways, that's the future. Now, which do you prefer? Of course, it doesn't really matter. On a probability basis, the third outcome is the most likely outcome. Whether you like it or you don't like it, or you prefer to genocide like Netanyahu, or you prefer whatever, that's the most likely, what I call in medicine prognosis, what we call in medicine prognosis. That's the prognosis. And what our job is to work towards accelerating that prognosis with therapy. Therapy like what? Like what Jewish Voice for Peace is doing, like Not in My Name is doing, like what we are doing here in Palestine, like what the resistance is doing. 99% of it, by the way, is popular resistance, not armed resistance. But we have to also be realistic that in every colonial, anti-colonial struggle, there's armed resistance, which colonizers like to call terrorism or barbarism or savagery, and that they are circling the wagons and protecting themselves, defending ourselves, etc. Anyway, I won't quibble with them. That's probably correct. They are defending themselves from the indigenous people. That's fine. But anyways, the reality is that's the reality of what we have. As a scientist, without being emotional about it, and even before I came here, I was on the earlier today, I was on the internet in a group called Israelis and Palestinians for Peace. And I wrote to them, what do you expect? What is it that you are expecting? You're by killing resistance leaders, you're going to obliterate the resistance. You're going to stop the resistance. I mean, even if you are a rational Zionist, let's say a rational colonialist, think about it. What is it that you cannot? For the life of me, I don't understand. If you kill, let's say that you managed to kill, so far I think it's about 8% of the population of Gaza that remains. And there's about 5% of the population of Gaza that left, by the way. Yes, a lot of people left Gaza, paid the Egyptian government bribes $5,000 each to leave Gaza. So there's about 200 to 300,000 Gazans who left Gaza in the past year and now almost year and 1 month. And there's the various estimates. We won't know the numbers, but we estimate between 200 to 300,000 who were killed. So you're talking about a large numbers. Killed or died because of diseases and malnutrition and etc., starvation, etc. The actual ones that are counted killed is 42,900 today. But anyway, those are the ones with death certificates. I don't include the Hamas fighters because if they are bombed in a tunnel or whatever, they are not going to go to a hospital. And also Israel holds thousands of bodies of Hamas fighters and also Hamas fighters themselves, so we don't know who Hamas. And also they hold a lot of innocent civilians, including many medical people, etc. There's estimates of 21,000 that Israel holds in its prisons now. Well, we don't know the numbers because the Red Cross is not allowed to visit Israeli prisons or see or get the full numbers. I'm going to stop here because I'm sure you have a lot of questions, a lot of comments, and a lot of other areas that I could have covered. I didn't cover, obviously, the areas that I'm most passionate about, which is the ecocide and the environmental justice issues And what we are doing here with planting and with the community garden, with other work we do, but you can learn about that by going to our website, palestinenature.org, and read about our activities, which are positive activities, lighting candles instead of cursing the dark, so to speak, building our communities, building our work with children, with women, with farmers, empowering them, food sovereignty issues that we are working on. I have several projects even in Gaza now, including we have remote sensing mapping of the damaged agricultural fields and starting to plan which fields to reclaim first and how to reclaim the soil in Gaza and how to replant Gaza if you want to be a productive agricultural area. And I'm working with people in Gaza about this, even though, believe it or not, under the bombing, even in the tents, they're planting there. There are groups that managed to get seeds into Gaza, believe it or not. I am connected to them. I won't tell you which, but because of the, but anyways, we managed to get some seeds to Gaza to grow plants even during this conflict. So thank you very much for this opportunity, and my apology again for skipping the first 20 minutes.
Well, no apologies needed, Dr. Kumsia, definitely no apologies needed. I think we do have a few questions. I know Phil and I came up with some questions for you, but there is one in the chat that I'll mention. If you could give folks an update, your home city, Bethlehem, and maybe a little bit broader, how are things now on the West Bank? How are people doing, and what is the situation like?
I am associated with Bethlehem University. Bethlehem University, since for a year now, like all universities in the West Bank, has had difficulties because of the closures. On day one, on October 7, 2023, Israel basically came and closed us up in our ghettos, if you want to call them, or concentration areas, or Bantustans, or whatever you want to call them. These are the areas of the West Bank that are kept for the Palestinian surplus population that they don't want. Perhaps the best term for it is a people warehouse. Bethlehem is a people warehouse to store unwanted people. 260,000 Palestinians in the Bethlehem district. 70,000 of them, about a third, are refugees living in 3 refugee camps and around the refugee camps. That's Gaza, Aida, and Heisha refugee camps in Bethlehem. These 260,000 people, including those 70,000 refugees, who come mostly from West Jerusalem, ethnically cleansed villages, has been already restricted to only 15% of the land before October 7, 2023. Since October 7, 2023, Israel's settlers and soldiers are trying to shrink us even further. So they started at least 6 new settlements in the Bethlehem region on land stolen from Palestinians. Newly, in the past year, I'm talking about. While things are happening in Gaza, there are things happening here in the West Bank. For example, Al-Makhrur Valley, just over here, over the hill in Beit Jala, a very beautiful natural area, also agricultural area like Battir, for those of you who are familiar, and Hussan and Al-Walaja. This has a new settlement now, an expansion of existing settlements like Har Gilo, but a new settlement that starts in Al Makhrur Valley area. This is also a World Heritage Site, Palestinian World Heritage Site. Israel is violating a World Heritage Site by starting this settlement in the area of the World Heritage Site. And that's in terms of land theft, of course, which has increased. Removal of people from their land is also done by preventing them from harvesting their olives and from doing their work. And people are attacked. Even yesterday, a 60-year-old woman was shot in the chest while she was picking olives, and she was killed. So it's horrific. I mean, the settlers, basically, they can go on and do pogroms everywhere. I must say that the Bethlehem area is a little less problematic, a little less violated than, let's say, Jenin area or Tulkarem or Nablus or the other ghettos, the other Bantustans that are in the north. In the north, it's far worse. I mean, literally pogroms, settlers coming in and burning cars and homes and shooting people and getting away with it. Doesn't mean it didn't happen in Bethlehem. It happened, but it's less frequent than in other places. And of course, Israeli army comes regularly into Bethlehem restricted zone, if you want, that has most of the Palestinians in Bethlehem are in this now probably 13% of a district land. And they come and arrest people, kidnap people, usually in the middle of the night, 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning. And terrorizing the neighborhood in the process by shooting and stun grenades and tear gas and things like that around the houses, etc. This is almost every other day there's such an incursion. The closures on Bethlehem was so severe that it's hard to predict when there is a way to open. Some of the exits of Bethlehem have been closed since October 7, 2023, so we cannot leave through those. And sometimes they leave one exit open, sometimes they close it, sometimes. So anyway, our students at the university cannot come from places like Jerusalem or Hebron on a regular basis. A miracle if they come, and it might take them 3 or 4 hours to get here, a distance that usually would take half an hour. So we were forced to do much of our courses online, etc. The other thing that I must mention about Bethlehem was devastated economically, obviously, in the past year, because we used to get every year 3 million tourists coming for the Church of Nativity, etc. And we are a tourist community. I'm talking about Bethlehem district, not just Bethlehem city. You know, my village is Beit Sahur, the shepherd's field. Most of the people in Beit Sahur are now unemployed. There's no employment because they were reliant on tourism, souvenir shops, souvenir making, etc., hotels, restaurants, and so on. Not only that, that's compounded by the fact that the people who used to work inside the Green Line, the laborers from Bethlehem, cannot go. Israel blocked all the laborers. So those used to make also additional income for Palestinians in the Bethlehem district. So economically, it's devastated, and the people, my students, cannot even afford tuitions anymore. So many of them dropped out of the university in the last year because they don't have family that has employment anymore. And this doesn't look like it's going to end anytime soon. Those who could borrow for a semester before could not borrow for this semester. So, you know, I could go on and on, but
Are there any other new questions in the chat, Maxine?
I
Just from a
put in the chat the website of PalestineNature.org, and now I'll put my own private email, mazen@kumsiya.org, and that website, kumsiya.org, has, for example, my book on sharing the land of Canaan, so you don't have to buy it. I have it there. You can read it. You can also read a lot of my writings there. And if you want to email me to join my email list, go ahead and just drop me an email. My email list usually focuses on positive things that can be done and on news that you don't see in mainstream media from the ground here, reporting from the West Bank.
If I could ask a question.
Yes.
So you use in your, I've heard you use this frequently, the medical model of diagnosis and etiology and therapy and prognosis. In light of what has happened, particularly just the utter destruction of Gaza, do you see a prognosis? Let's say that there's a ceasefire. Let's say that the gates open and the humanitarian trucks come in, and so forth. How do you see things a year or two, or do you just not think that far because it's impossible to predict?
I mean, as I said, the only possible scenario and the most likely scenario to happen, also, even if you don't consider it as the only option, is one country for all its citizens, equality, human rights, justice. This is long term. Whether it happens in 1 year or in 5 years, I don't have a crystal ball for it. My guess is it will be fairly quicker than most of us here on this call believe will happen, including me, by the way. Because when I was involved in the struggle against apartheid in South Africa in the 1980s, yes, I'm old enough to have done that. If you had asked me in the middle of the 1980s, 1985, 1986, asked me if apartheid will end in South Africa, I would have said yes, but it will need 40, 50 years. And that these people have been fighting for decades now, and it will take a long time for reconciliation, whatever. And then all of us were essentially surprised in 1989 by the acceleration, of course, thanks to the lobbies, thanks to the BDS movement, thanks to all of these things, which we were participating in, but never in our wildest dreams would happen that quickly. Okay, so that's my view. The same thing, by the way, on the that the Berlin Wall was gone. That happened faster than I had predicted. So I think we can be relatively optimistic about the time frame, but it really doesn't matter to me. The time frame can stretch longer or can shrink, but that depends on us. If we work hard, we can make the time frame shorter. If we, raise hell around, especially countries that are partners in crime in this genocide, and you know what I mean by that. The US is not only supporting genocide, the US is partner in genocide, partner with this genocide. And we have to realize not just the Israeli government, the American government. And so we must work in the US. If I was in the US, that's what I would be doing. I'd be doing civil disobedience. I'd be arrested. You know, like you all, many of you are engaged in these kinds of actions. Here, I am facing the Israelis, and yes, I was arrested and detained and harassed many, many times. I won't bother you with the details, but that's another issue. You know, and for me, it's very mild compared to what most Palestinians go through, partly because I'm protected by, because I have a US passport, and also because I have a network of, you know, tens of thousands of people on my email list, etc. So when they arrested me in the past, like, you know, they got a lot of pressure, but I'm not sure they care about pressures anymore. I know American citizens actually who were killed by the Israelis, even tortured to death, and died, and nobody, the State Department doesn't give a shit about Palestinian Americans. So anyways, I mean, they killed Shireen Abu Akleh, they killed Rachel Corrie, they killed many, many American citizens. The US doesn't protect American citizens if they happen to be on the wrong side of the lobby. So anyways, so yeah, I mean, I don't know if I answered your question, but in terms of what will happen in Gaza, maybe I'll say one last sentence about that. We are doing some studies now. I think some things in Gaza are areas we can reclaim and rebuild and replenish. And some areas I'm not sure we're going to be able to. We don't have enough data yet, for example, about the water aquifer. But my own educated guess is that the water aquifer, if it is repairable, it will take about 30 years to repair the aquifer. Because Israel pumped seawater, for example, in the tunnels that Hamas built. This is like the Beit Kong tunnels. But imagine on a sandy soil and pumping seawater into these tunnels. Where does that seawater end? It ends up in the aquifer. So how are you going to replenish an aquifer that's full of salt now? You have to dilute it. You have to keep diluting it. And so you have to open up a lot of fresh water on it. That takes decades, but there's not enough fresh water to do this.
I'd like to add a question, and then I see a couple of hands up, but Dr. Kumsia, I remember hearing you speak years ago, and you talked about, I guess I'm referring to, I just really love to hear from you as a ecologist, a genetics expert, biologist, the importance of biodiversity. And it sort of follows on what you're saying now about looking at areas of Gaza that can be renewed, restored, hoping, you know, assuming that the genocide will stop and there's a chance. I guess I have two questions. One is kind of your thoughts in a global way about the environment of Gaza and what environmental impacts to health we need to be looking at and thinking about remedying. And then I guess the other question is epigenetics. When we think about the children of Gaza and the absolute, I don't even know the word, devastation to childhood and the impact of that on future generations. You might talk as a scientist. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll start with the last part. The last part is also a part I worry about in terms of fixing Gaza, if you want. How do you fix a lost generation when you talk about children who are raised malnourished for years? By the way, we're not talking even about after October 7, 2023. Malnourishment was an Israeli policy in Gaza. I know because I actually had a project. I was a president of Rotary Club. I'm still a Rotary member. And we did a project in Gaza for malnutrition, for women pregnant, for newborn children, to try and ensure they get enough nutrition. Because as you know, if you don't have good nutrition, mental development is retarded, basically. I mean, I'm sorry to use this terminology, but you're destroying a whole generation of people. And I'm not sure that that's repairable in the short term. And maybe that generation will have to just pass and the next generation will have to come. So yes, psychological damage, autism, I don't want to use the same term, post-traumatic stress disorder, because I have traumatic stress disorder that has been going on for decades. And generation after generation, not even post anything. But even if we assume, on a good scenario that we end this war and we have one country and we have peace, that's a win-win situation for everybody. Well, the legacy of this is not, that's what keeps me awake at night, The legacy for the environment, for the ecocide that happens in Gaza, the remnants of the depleted uranium and of the white phosphorus and all of this stuff. This is the unlivability of the area, etc. This keeps me researching, keeps me awake, keeps me thinking, keeps me trying, keeps me moving to do something more. And sometimes you're limited by your physical capacity. But anyways, to the first part, what was the first part? Now, you see, I'm getting Alzheimer's disease.
Hmm.
What
Yeah.
was the first part? Remind me.
I think you kind of have answered it, but just thinking about the impact on environmental health in Gaza.
Oh, yeah. No, you mentioned something else, biodiversity.
Oh, but you talked about the importance of that in a culture.
The importance of biodiversity. Now I remember. Diversity is critical. I'm talking about biological diversity and human diversity. And colonialism is against both biological diversity and against human diversity. Please remember this. For example, I give you just a rough example. When Israel was created in 1948, they destroyed 530 Palestinian communities that lived in what became the state of Israel. But they didn't just destroy these people and their diversity. They also destroyed the trees around those villages. They literally bulldozed the trees. Millions of trees, both domestic trees like figs and almonds and olives, but also wild trees like hawthorn and carobs and oaks and so on. And they did plant one kind of tree, which is pine tree, replacing a polyculture, a diverse culture of trees with a monoculture of trees, of pine trees, which are today burning in the north, by the way. As I speak, there's fires in the north, in the Galilee, because they planted pine trees when they shouldn't have planted pine trees. This used to be in the old days when they had those blue boxes for Jewish National Fund, plant a tree of Israel for Israel in the 1950s and so on. And they still do it, by the way. Of course, 95, 98% of the money doesn't go to planting trees. It goes for colonization or for destruction and for uprooting villages and so on. Jewish National Fund, a supranational entity, is a terrorist organization, in my humble opinion. But anyways, this is the Karen Kayemet Israel, for those of you who speak Hebrew. So anyways, this is what we face. And this is just one example. I could cite you many, many other examples. But I do want to mention the issue of connectivity between biological diversity and human diversity. And there is a very critical connectivity between those. The US is right there in your background. You know the example right there. How many nations were there? How much biological diversity was there before the Europeans came? And how much was reduced after the European came, killed 2 to 3 million buffaloes, for example, changes courses of rivers, species went extinct, introduced invasive species. Here, Israel introduced dozens of invasive European species to us, by the way, both plants and animals that are destroying our environment. But that's not unusual for, I don't want to make Israel like the bad guy. All colonizers do this. US, Australia, how many of the original fauna and flora remain after the European invasion and the colonization and the destruction of habitats and the introduction of invasive species? So they destroy biological diversity and human diversity. How many tribes of Aborigines were there? How many languages? How many tribes of natives in North America were there? And how many after are left? How many languages were spoken? How many are left? 44 languages were spoken in Palestine before 1948. 44 languages. Where did they go? Now we have Arabic, Hebrew, a little bit, couple of others. Russian, by the way, Russian, because we have 1 million Russians that were imported.
I think Moji had your hand up for a while. Can you unmute?
Yes, except that apparently, you must be pressed for time. So is it okay that
Yeah, we have time for 2 more questions. You're
Okay.
up now, and then Timothy
Okay,
has his
thank
hand
you.
up as well.
Thank you. Salam alaikum, Brother Mazen. This is Moji Agha Mujtaba Agha Muhammadi. I am from Iran, as you know I am. And I just wanted to, first of all, salute you for your courage. And I can see how tired your voice is, how tired. And I mean, you're carrying on your brave shoulders the pains, the traumas, the multiple traumas of so many people. So I wanted to thank you for what you're doing. There are a lot of questions that I could pose or comments, but I just limit it to one, given that there is not much time. We keep hearing more about the two-state solution. And to the extent that this is not a, just something to say for politicians that want to say we are not just completely, siding with settler colonialism, genocide, to what extent do you see, if you see, that is, a two-state solution, so-called solution, as a way to get to the one-state democratic secular solution for Palestine? So thank you.
Okay, thank you. I will be very brief because it would be hard also to summarize. I wrote a whole book, as I mentioned, about the subject called Sharing the Land of Canaan. And you can read it on my website to explain why there's no such thing as a two-state solution, even as an interim solution, if you want. It's a delusion or an illusion, but not a solution. Because again, as a scientist, I look at what the other patients had, what the other countries had, and we have never had a colonial, anti-colonial struggle that ended up with any fourth scenario other than the three scenarios I talked about. Never in history, and will never be. And if you want to know more in detail why never in history, you can read my book and explain. Or maybe I'll mention one thing very quick to explain why you cannot have a two-state solution to a colonial, anti-colonial struggle. When they started the negotiations for Oslo, naively or out of stupidity or out of malice, the PLO accepted the two-state solution. I don't know why they accepted to go down a path of talking about two-state solution when all the logic argued against it. But when they decided to do that, and the Arab states said, okay, if the PLO is agreeable, we're agreeable. So let's go ahead and negotiate on that. So they started the negotiations in Oslo. And I'll give you an example, a very, minor example. The Water Committee, that was supposed to be the four main issues to be discussed: refugees, statehood, Jerusalem, and water, the main, or natural resources in general, but mostly water. Those are the four issues for negotiations. I take the water because it's the simplest one. When they started negotiating, the Palestinian chief representative for the Water Committee started presenting their position. He got interrupted in the middle of his opening speech by the Israeli representative, who did this in his hand, meaning point of order. And he said to him, look, there's a language issue here which we have to dispense with. You cannot be talking about Palestinian rights to water. You can be talking about Palestinian needs for water, but you can never talk about Palestinian rights to water. And that's it. No more discussion that would involve Palestinian rights to water. Palestinian needs of water, we're happy to discuss. But Palestinian rights to water, no. Absolutely logical from a colonial perspective. If they accept our rights to one spring of water here, what's in, let's say, Beit Jala or Bethlehem here, what's the difference between that and our rights as indigenous people to springs of water in Jaffa and Haifa and Nazareth? So it demolishes the colonial idea. So the idea of rights and giving us a right in a part of the land or even in one spring of water, and I challenge the Palestinian Authority to show me one Israeli leader who accepted that the Palestinians have a right to live in Ramallah, where they have their fake capital there, Mr. Abu Mazen. Show me one Israeli that says Palestinians have a right to live in Ramallah. But that's it. I don't want any more. They have a right to live in Ramallah as indigenous people, okay? They won't accept that because it will undermine the Zionist idea. That's why a two-state solution doesn't work, even in an example I'm telling you. Because you either have that or you have, you either have Zionism and colonialism as legitimate, or you have natives having rights. And then you talk about if natives have rights. Of course, we don't have a problem with immigrants living with us. We welcome immigrants. We welcomed Armenians, for example. They became full citizens. There's an Armenian quarter in Jerusalem. Druze, Ethiopians who came here, Jews after Russian pogroms. My grandfather's best friend was Jewish. His family came from Russia. They were welcome because they came to live with us, not to dominate us. We welcome them. So they have rights now because now they are part of the system. Timothy has his hand raised for a long time.
Yeah, First,
Timothy, you want to unmute?
yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Mazen, for being here. I really appreciate it. I'd love to hear more about the remote sensing that you're doing in Gaza over farmlands. Like, what are you using open source satellite imagery for that, and kind of how are you making the determinations about where to focus on? And yeah.
Yeah, we're working with a group of experts in the US and England. I'm not an expert in remote sensing or GIS or anything like that. My role in the project is I have contacts in Gaza, and I have contacts with the Ministry of Agriculture, people who left Gaza, who knew what was planted where. And we have some data here also in the Ministry of Agriculture in Ramallah. So I'm collecting the data for the before and also a little bit on the after. And I even have one person who, risking his own life, went and took some pictures for me of some of the damaged greenhouses in Gaza. So that's my role in this. So I cannot really tell you much about the technical but I'm happy to connect you with them if you are interested, or find the technical details, etc., what they are doing.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, I
But they
think,
showed me things that I was really impressed. I mean, they showed me, for example, by remote sensing, they showed me a graph. For example, on this specific location, there's an olive grove. In this other location, there's a seasonal crop. And you can tell it's a seasonal crop because the wavelength that they capture, I don't know, UV, satellite image, whatever, photosynthesis increases in the spring, winter, spring, and then decreases, and then increases again, decreases year after year. This is happening. And then you come to 2023, and then that peak is flat, gone. So that's a fully damaged seasonal crop. I was impressed that they could do this kind of analysis without setting foot in the land.
well, I think we have to wrap it up. And again, so much love and appreciation for not only what you're doing now, but what you've really dedicated your life to. We look to you for an example of never giving up, finding hope in the most dire situations. And all we can do is if you can do it, damn it, we have to do it. And what we have to do is to work on our side of the ocean to somehow get our government to change what it's doing.
One
would,
last thing, say one
Mhm.
sentence.
y-
Well, I would say new in Gaza, the US in 2001, because the Israelis have shot her in her eye. She was 7 years old in 2001. So now she's 30 years old and has a son who's 10 years old. She's in the 10th city, and I talk to her almost every day. And I asked her one time, I told her I give a lot of talks to people from around the world. And for example, before I went to Australia and to the US, I'm coming to the US, by the way, in December. I'm going to the UK and Ireland in November. So if any of you want to host me, I'm happy to. You can email me again, the email in the chat room. But anyway, I asked this girl who lost her eye, lost many members of her family, who's lost her house, everything she owns. What does she want me to tell you? And she said, well, do they support Palestine? I said, yes. She said, well, then please thank them. And I thank you for what you are doing. You are doing important work. Don't give up. Keep doing it. Stay human and humane. And this is what connects us. We're all one people. I don't believe in nation states or nationality, by the way. I'm as much a citizen in your country as I am in this country. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We will be hosting you when you're in New Haven on December 9th, I believe it is. But I think you have on your website your itinerary where you're going to be on your trip to the US. We will post that on the JVP Health webpage as well, so that people can make plans accordingly if they want to meet with you face to face while you're here.
That's very, come to think of it, it's not on my website, but I'll send you the link for the program.
Okay.
Maybe I could put it on my website.
Okay. I think Maxine has something to say about the post-webinar evaluation, or is that supposed to be me to say it?
I'm glad to say that. I can, you'll get something with your chance to, if you signed up for the webinar, you'll get a chance to evaluate it. And we appreciate the feedback and also suggestions for other speakers that fit in with the health, human rights work of JVP Health Advisory Council. And I've also posted a couple of times our website and our Instagram. And there's a chance also on the evaluation to indicate that you would like to be involved, and we would welcome everyone's participation to really strengthen. I think there's not been a more critical time for health voices to be speaking up. And ours as Jewish health workers, allies of Jewish health workers, we need to keep the pressure on absolutely now on our government. Please, please contact your senators. We need to make sure now every single person is getting deluged with mail, with messages to end the funding. It's just so important. No US arms for Israel anymore. Thank you, Dr. Mazen. Thank you, everyone who showed up today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you all. And this will be on our the JVP Health website as well, for somebody who wants to watch it later on. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Good night. Well,
night.
Good day for those of you who are in the US.
Thank you, Dr. Mazen. You're just such an inspiration to all of us. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Be safe.
Take care. Thanks, Phil, for reminding me.
Thank Rita
Yeah.
for Rita got out of bed and went down to her computer to get your number to give me. So she deserves a big, and next time.
Takes a village.
Yeah, it takes a village. That's right. I will say the last thing, and this is the tagline on all of my emails. The idea that some lives matter less is the root of all that is wrong with the world. Dr. Paul Farmer.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care.
Bye-bye.